Hey everyone, Selena here, founder, host, lead educator with the American Crochet Association, also the writer behind Selena Baca Crochet for classic patterns like this classic granny square. If you guys are watching, come on over, say hey, say hello, tell me where you're viewing from. As long as we're here live, I'll give you a shout out. We'll make it a great conversation. But if you are watching on the replay, just play along like we're here live. And as soon as I see your comment, I'll get right back to you. I promise. All right. So today I have just totally revamped everything I had to say about the classic granny square pattern. I think this is everything I have to say about it. Mainly because the classic granny square is one of the most iconic things that we have in the crochet world. Whether you crochet or not, I feel like you look at this thing and you're like, that's a granny square. I know what that is. This is a pattern that I didn't invent. Who invented this? We have no idea. There are tons of resources on this. So really, this is just kind of a combination of all of my favorite granny square resources and things, including my very own stitch pattern. I've got a video tutorial. I've got a chart. I mean, really, it's just all the things that you're going to need to crochet this thing. So it really is just kind of this great teaching tool. Real quick, before we get started, I need to know, so let me know in the comments, have you ever crocheted a granny square before? That's all right. Take your time. Take your time. It's a yes, I've made one. No, I have not made one. Also, after this live, if you have anything granny square related, I would love to see it in the comments. So definitely link us, share your granny square pictures, share your granny square projects. I want to see the pictures. All right. I would really love to see. So this post today not only combines all my favorite resources to teach you how to crochet a granny square, but there's a ton of other resources just to help you see other ways granny squares can be crocheted. I definitely have my favorite way to crochet a granny square. And I didn't realize it for a really long time that there are other ways to crochet granny squares. My mind was literally blown. I was like, what? There's more than one way? Yeah, there's more than one way to crochet a granny square. So I do have some tips and tutorials for those as well. I've also crocheted many granny square specific things to where I have taken a granny square and it starts out as a granny square, so it uses the exact same stitch pattern that I'm going to show you here, and then it turns into something completely different. Like this hat that I'm wearing, it started as a granny square. So the beginning of this hat is a 100%, I followed the instructions, this granny square, and then I transformed it into something else. So granny squares can totally just be a square that turns into a blanket. I feel like that's iconically the thing that we know them for. But granny squares can be so versatile. They can turn into things like this hat. We can also turn them into other things like a scarf. Or we can make a totally other blanket with a bunch of different granny squares put together. Anyway, I have tons of resources. I have tons of things to say about the granny square, and I've put them all together in this article. You guys can find the link to this article in the video description. One of my favorite new things to do whenever I write an article like this is I put a table of contents out there. You're welcome. You're welcome. I love a good table of contents. So I work really hard to put one of these together for you guys. So I'm going to kind of go through each one of these, but I'm not going to read it verbatim. So again, click on the link in the video description if you want all of the details on all the things that I'm sharing today about all the granny squares. So first and foremost, what is a granny square? And then we go all the way into tips and resources and tutorials and all that kind of stuff. So here it is, classic granny square. First and foremost, what is a granny square? I see this term used a lot on the internet, and I had a few things to say about it. Like, for example, this is a classic granny square. You might see a square motif somewhere that is solid. That's not a classic granny square. You might see a granny square that has puff stitches in it. That's not a classic granny square. It's a variation. It's a shout out. It's granny square adjacent, but it's not a classic granny square. So I've just kind of put in a little bit of 2 cents in on what is a classic granny square. My friends, it is this right here. It is the combination of the 3 double crochet stitches, and in between them there are either chain 1 and then chain 2 or chain 3 spaces. I've seen it either ways. Either way, I definitely have a strong opinion that a granny square should have a chain 3 corner. That's just me at my core, but I have seen them with the chain 2 corner. it hurts my feelings a little bit, but I'm not mad at it. It's like it goes against my grain. But anyway, this classically is the granny square. Are there shout outs and again, adjacents and sisters and cousins? Yes, there are. But classically speaking, here she is. This is her. So I wanted to introduce you. History of the granny square. When I was kind of doing a little bit of reading on this, I found that Wikipedia was my favorite. There have been crochet books that I've followed that definitely reference things that I saw on Wikipedia. And Wikipedia did a great job of referencing all those books that I enjoy that talk about the history of the granny square. So if you want some more feedback, including the first traditional granny square example that was posted, then I've got you covered. Granny squares for beginners. I could not write this article without sharing my very controversial opinions about granny squares being a teaching tool for beginners. That definitely hurts all of my feelings. Speaking as a person who learned to crochet by making granny squares, I cried a lot. I did. I don't know how I made it. I don't know how I overcame that barrier of learning to crochet because I started with granny squares, but it was a long, hard road. And my therapist knows all about it. I'm kidding. But am I? Anyway, granny squares, I don't feel that they're great beginner tools. So I kind of shared a little bit of feedback about why I feel that way. I know so many people who came to crochet. They came to crochet because they made granny squares and are like, I crochet all the things now. I learned with a granny square. Everybody's going to learn. I'm like, let's stop the trauma. The trauma stops with us, like just because we were traumatized with granny squares, even though we love them now. Like, let's not do that to the next generation. So anyway, I share a lot of my unpopular opinions about granny squares as beginner patterns. They're not. And I give you guys just some tips and resources about why they're more intermediate and it's not a great first pattern. But then I also share some resources that, hey, if you came here because you're like, granny squares are where it's at, I'm going to teach all the people how to crochet. I'm like, let's just slow down. Let's take some deep breaths. Instead, I definitely have some resources to help you teach crochet or to learn crochet. And so I've linked that here. So if you're looking for beginner crochet patterns, just keep going. Don't stop at the granny square. There's more. There are better things out there than the granny square. Let's not bring tears to the world of crochet. We can do better. Okay? We can. What do you need to crochet a granny square? It just depends on what it is that you're making. If you just want to learn crochet today for the first time and you're like, I just want to make it. I just want to make my first granny square. It doesn't matter. Then it doesn't matter. You can literally pick up any yarn. Doesn't matter of the weight. Choose a larger weight, I'll suggest, just so you can really see your stitches, so you can really see what you're doing, so you're not really struggling. And then whatever hook your yarn calls for, just use that hook. Again, just to get it started, just to make your first granny square. But after that, if you're following a pattern, if you're ever following any pattern, then definitely do whatever that pattern suggests, especially if gauge is crucial or size is crucial. If you're making something that's supposed to fit something or supposed to be a size, follow the pattern. So if the pattern says, hey, I know we're making granny squares, but it's a hat, so use this yarn and this hook, then definitely listen to the pattern, all right? And then you'll make the thing that you want to make. Materials, really it depends on the pattern, but really if you're just learning how to crochet a granny square, you just need yarn and a hook. Any yarn and hook will do. Size and gauge, again, just kind of depends on the pattern. And if you're making a classic granny square, while these stitch repeat to make the square thing that's in a round, that is joined, that does increase, that's all kind of intermediate, but the stitches that we're using are very basic. So if you can crochet chains, if you can crochet double crochets, if you can slip stitch, then you could be ready to crochet a granny square. Should it be your first thing to learn all those things? Again, I don't think so. All right. Specialty stitches and techniques for this particular pattern, for all of the resources that I'm showing for the granny square, I do use the adjustable loop, but you don't have to. I've got a variation for you. So if you'd like to start with a chain and then work into that chain, I've got some tips for you to do that. All right, how to crochet a granny square. Before I get into those tips and all that other stuff, let me see who is here live, because there are quite a few of you here. My friend Angelica McKinney is here. Always so good to see you. Hope you're having a great new year. Roseanne is here. Hello to Roseanne. Hello, Sophie, who is watching from Canada. So good to see you. Megan Lloyd. Megan Lloyd says, hello, all. I have crocheted them. Yes, you have made some granny squares. Roseanne says, too many times. So you've made all the granny square. Too many times. Yes. Yes, you have. You've made all the granny squares. Randy is here. Hello, says, yes, I've made one, but still not confident with changing colors. I've got a resource for you. So if you want to see how to change colors in joined rounds, like with a granny square, I've got a video tutorial. So definitely click on the link after this video and I will walk you through it. And if you have any questions, I'm just an email away, or let me know in the comments. I'll be happy to help you with some more resources. Looks like Sophie has made some granny squares. Hello, Tracy. Good to see you. Sophie says, just finished a kaleidoscope granny square blanket. Friend, I want to see all the pictures, so definitely share them here in the comments, or come on over to our crochet communities. They are linked to this page, so whatever page you're viewing from, the communities are linked there. I want to see your project, especially if they're granny squares. Hello, Lisa. Good to see you. Kelly Jones is here. Says, granny squares, my favorite. Stacy Till says, granny square yarn is going to be the death of me. Still trying to get it to work. Almost got it, but not quite yet. You know, Stacy, I did see that there's now a granny square yarn to where it changes color with every round. I don't know. If you guys have used it, let me know what your thoughts are. I've not used it yet. I have not seen it in person. I've just seen the internet talking about it. So I'm curious. Let me know what you think, especially if you used it before. Amanda Woodbury's here, says, I agree with all of this. I'm so glad. It's so good to see you here. Thanks for checking in. All right, and last but not least, my friend Roxanne is here just checking in. So good to see you here, my friend. Okay. All right, so granny square tips. Again, if you've never made a granny square, if you've tried and you're like, what? I don't get the magic. What is the spell to just make this thing square? So I've got some tips for you and I've got some resources, okay? So let's take it one step at a time. First and foremost, I've got a video tutorial, okay? So depending on how you like to learn, sometimes we have to see somebody do it. Sometimes we have to see it in its entirety. Then we have to read instructions. Then I have to see a picture. Then I have to jump up and down 3 times. And then it has to be Tuesday. And then I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it, right? So sometimes we just need to like see and feel and smell and taste all the things. If that is you, that's definitely how I am. I'm going to suggest watch my video tutorial first. It is very quick and to the point. I'm not going to tell you about what I ate for lunch and all that kind of stuff. It's to the point. It's very quick. Also, it's on YouTube. So if you want to alter the speed of the of watching the replay, you can do that. I love that feature. Sometimes I'm like, can I put it at 1.5x? Let me put it at 1.7. Let me put it at 2x the speed. So you can definitely change the speed. And that way, if you want to speed it up or slow it down, you can do that. Anyway, watch the video tutorial first. The instructions are going to be on the screen, but also I have the instructions right here. So definitely watch it first before you even pick up your yarn, before you pick up your hook, because you're going to have to follow certain stitch repeats to make those corners, okay? You're going to have to make the corners and make the sides, and they all have to be equidistant, and the stitches have to match. It's a thing. Once you get it, you don't really have to follow a pattern anymore because the stitch pattern kind of reveals itself. And the great thing about granny squares, and I think the reason so many people go, it's a beginner pattern, is that once you get the hang of it, you don't really have to keep reading the instructions. You're like, oh, I totally know what to do now. I'm at a corner, I do this, I'm on a side, I do that. I totally got it. But until you get it, watch the whole video first, okay? Watch the video. Also, this is going to be a great teaching tool, just this whole granny square thing. If you are looking to learn how to read written patterns, if you're the kind of person that's like, I've only ever watched video tutorials, I don't know how to do anything else, a granny square could be a really good introductory tool for you to learn how to finally read crochet patterns. Because as you're watching this video, as you're crocheting this granny square, it's complex, but you can follow the written instructions and kind of decipher that key in terms of how they're written. So hopefully it can help you read and follow another and understand other crochet patterns that are written. There's also a stitch chart that goes with this. So again, if you don't know how to read crochet stitch charts, I've got a chart here. And again, as you're learning the granny square, as you're learning written instructions, as you're following the video tutorial, that stitch chart is going to be a great tool for you as well. So I've got all three of these things right here, quick and easy for you that you can just read and follow along to make your very first granny square. Now, the next question or the next thing that people say or want to know whenever it comes to granny squares is like, okay, so I make one square and it's a blanket, right? Yeah, you can make one square and it can be a blanket. And then people are like, wait, I can make a lot of squares and then join those squares together, and then those squares will make another thing. Yes. And then some people are like, absolutely not. I'm not joining things together. That sounds terrible. Fear not, fear not. That used to be me because I didn't know that there is more than one way to join granny squares together. Did you guys know this? Let's not gatekeep that information anymore, okay? There are so many different ways we can join granny squares together. And my friends, some of my favorite are to join them as you're working. That means I made one granny square. I'm done with that. I'm going to make another granny square. This granny square has to fit with this granny square. So as I'm crocheting this granny square, I'm going to crochet it into that granny square. Oh my gosh, guys, that's life-changing. I have 9 different ways you guys can join crochet pieces together with crochet, with sewing, and I've got a video tutorial for each one of those things. So if you're afraid of granny squares simply because you're like, I am not joining things together, definitely check this out because I've got 9 video tutorials for you to watch just to kind of give you all the ways, all right? All of them. Now, there are lots and lots and lots of things we can make with granny squares. Yes, you can always make just one giant square and it can be a blanket, but you can take that granny square and turn it into so many other things. This hat, you can make this hat. I do have some free patterns that I've shared with the American Crochet Association that you can view for free. I've linked them all. Click on the link in the video description wherever you're watching. The very first thing is the granny square market tote. My friends, this is 3 granny squares and they are joined together and it makes this really fantastic tote. So much fun, one of my favorite things. I've got a granny square pillow cover. This is a great teaching tool, not only to see how to join different motifs together, the square granny square motifs together, because there are a few of them, but it's also just such a great lesson in gauge, in size, in measuring, in a fun way. And it's with a pillow cover. So you're making something small, but you're kind of meshing in all these different techniques. Like you guys can use any yarn to make this pillow cover. Any yarn. Here, can I make this bigger? Can I? No? Yes? There, a little bit, maybe. Okay. Anyway, you got to click on over. You guys can use any yarn that you have on hand. I show you how to measure. There's a worksheet on here. So you can make all these little squares, join them together. It's a great stash buster. And then when you're done with that, you crochet around those squares to make the pillow as large or as small as you want. This is a pillow that I made that's in my house. So cute. I just love little things like this because it's such a classic thing, these granny squares, but I use these beautiful little pops of purple just to kind of make it look a little more cute and a little more modern. So if you're the kind of person who's like, granny squares are ugly because they're just the colors and the yarn, well, then choose your favorite colors and your favorite yarn to kind of match with your own aesthetic like this, or to match your house. You can totally make it your own. Okay. Another thing that you guys can do with granny squares is to make a vest. You guys are just going to have to click on over. You just have to see it to believe it. So this is a bunch of granny squares joined together, and then you crochet on top of those granny squares, and it makes this vest. I made this vest in cotton a couple years ago. And it is like real popular. Like you guys love this thing. Like a lot of people have made this thing. I think it's just such a fun way to use granny squares. It's a great learning tool. It's a great teaching tool. It's very approachable. So it's one of those kind of pieces of clothing to where you can measure it as you go. You can definitely use yarn you already have on hand. It's not a fussy, complicated kind of thing. So it's definitely one of those crochet pieces that you feel very confident with what you're doing as you're doing it. And when you try it on, it's like, oh, yep, that's what I wanted it to do. Okay. All right. And as always, I'm just an email away if you guys have any questions or anything like that. Granny square variations. This is a little bit more about how, like, what a classic granny square is and is not. So I do kind of talk a little bit about that. Like if you see a granny square and it's got some popcorn stitches in it, it's classic granny square adjacent, right? It's not like a classic granny square. If you see all solid stitches and there's no chains between anything, granny square adjacent, right? It's a shout out. And here is my tip on, is there only one way to work a granny square? Because Selena, you just showed me a video tutorial and a written pattern and a chart, and they were all the same thing. No, there are different ways you can work a granny square. So as you're joining the rounds, you can do different things to start and stop each round. For example, my favorite way is to slip stitch over to the chain 3 space. It's way number 1 right here, but you can also turn your work and make the granny square, instead of it just having a right side and a wrong side, which again, that's what I do. That's what I do. But you can also make it reversible. So there's 3 different ways you can start them. I've got some tips for you and pictures for each one. If you guys love the granny stitch and you're like, okay, I don't want to just make squares all the time, but I really like the stitch. I like what it's doing. I like the, the 3 clusters of double crochet with the chain spaces. Like what else you got for me? I've got you, because believe me, I am a little granny stitch obsessed. So here are some free crochet patterns that you can view with the American Crochet Association that I've written that use granny stitches, starting with the granny chevron table runner. Once you start this, it's going to be a mile long. This is so much fun to make. This is probably one of my favorite stitch variations to work up, just because. No explanation given. It just is. I have a granny stitch triangle scarf. Say that 3 times fast. So it's really just half of a classic granny square. You're not making that whole granny square, so it's not joined in rounds. You're starting it, but then you're going to stop halfway, and that way it's just going to be a triangle. And instead of working in rounds, you're going to work in rows. Very cool way to use the granny stitch triangles. Granny stitch. Oh my gosh, this is cool. It also comes with the stitch chart, and that way if you're still kind of figuring out the whole granny square, granny stitch thing, you've got that resource there to help you. And last but not least, here is a crochet Christmas stocking pattern using the classic granny stitch. It is not a granny square. It is not a bunch of granny squares joined together. My friends, I cracked the code on working in joined rounds using the granny stitch. This is one piece from toe all the way up to cuff. It's one piece. So if you want to do something really cool and different, interesting with the granny stitch, and you want to make a one-piece Christmas stocking, I know that it is not the Christmas season right now, but some of us are always ready for the Christmas season. Am I right? I know I am. I can feel you guys out there. So anyway, if you want to give this a try, I've got it there for you. And that's it. Those are all the things I wanted to share about the classic granny square, all of my thoughts, my opinions, my tips, my tricks, all of the different ways you can make different granny squares, tips to start them differently, video tutorials, all that kind of stuff. Do me a solid, guys. Click on the link in the video description. Read through. Let me know if you think I'm missing anything. If you guys want to share your favorite granny stitch patterns out there in the internet, your favorite things that you've done with granny squares, I would love to see. Please post your pictures either in the comments here or in my community group American Crochet Association. That's where we can share all things crochet. I would love to see your granny square makes. All right. Okay, let's see who else is here, what you guys are saying. Let's make it a fun conversation. Let's see. Lisa says, when I first learned to crochet, I made several granny square Afghans. I'm a glutton for punishment. Same thing, my friend. The very first thing I learned to crochet successfully was a granny square, and we just made a million of them. I remember like really struggling with it and feeling like I don't really know what I'm doing. And honestly, looking back, whenever we learned to crochet, we learned with granny squares. We weren't taught to read a pattern. It was just somebody showing us what to do. I had no idea what the stitches were called. I had no idea what I was doing. And I couldn't do anything else in crochet. So really, I could make a granny square, but that was it. And so later on, when I like taught myself more about crochet, I was like, okay. All right. So really we started at step 9 when we started. We should have started at step 10. Let me just say that even though I sound very salty about it, I persevered. I love crochet. I'm so glad that I learned to crochet at such a young age. I persevered though. Not everyone does. So if, most people who try to learn crochet, If they start with something very difficult, they're like, it's me, I just can't learn. And I just don't want that for people. So, I mean, it was really difficult for me and I did struggle and I did persevere, but like that isn't going to happen for anyone else. So if you are a person who does crochet and you're like, I learned with a granny square and I don't need therapy and I teach other people a granny square, we can do better. We can. Granny square can be the 5th thing that they learn to make, right? We're not taking it out, which is not step number 1, maybe. Stacy Till says, I've made a granny square coatigan. The thing is heavy, perfect for these freezing temps. I love those so much. And I love that I've seen those things like in the fashion world. I've seen them on movies. I've seen them on TV. I love seeing things like that. I love seeing granny squares that aren't, I love seeing granny squares that are blankets, but I love seeing granny squares that aren't blankets. So yeah, those are pretty cool. Angelica, I saw the granny square yarn. So many people say it's hard to make it work like it should. It does sound great not having to weave in the colors. Yeah, I think that there's definitely going to be a tension thing with that. And I think that it's probably going to take a little bit of playing around with it to get it right. I think it's such a cool idea that the yarn is dyed in the exact measurements needed for each round. Like, that's pretty cool. But again, I think that it just is going to take a little bit of tension. I think that you're definitely going to have to use a very specific hook size and you're going to have to work up the granny square just a couple times just to make sure that the exact colors are matching up where they need to. Really just such a cool tool. So yeah, I'm really interested to see, I'm just interested to see more. Let's see, Angelica. I never heard of granny squares until I joined your group. Oh my gosh, my friend. Well, I'm so glad. That's why, sometimes when you think something is just out there in the world, like granny squares, I mean, I think that I first wrote this granny square pattern. I first published my take on the granny square pattern, I think about 3 or 4 years ago. But at the time, I was like, there's 1,000,001 resources out here for granny squares. Like, really? But there's so many people who are just joining crochet or don't know where to find a resource that, is easy for them to kind of like read and understand and follow and replicate. And I just had so much more to say about granny squares. And I had so many different things I wanted to show in terms of a granny square. So really, this is just one spot where you can get everything that I feel that I've figured out in terms of granny squares. So yeah, if you guys could click on over, give it a read. Let me know if you think I'm missing anything. I'd love to hear what you think. Angelica says, the primrose bag was my first granny square, I believe. I'm so glad you said that because the primrose is just a square motif, but it is not a granny square because really classic granny squares, my friends, they look like this. They've got the 3 double crochets and they're separated by either 1, 2, or 3 chains. So this is a classic granny square. If there's anything else going on, any other kind of fancy footwork going on in there, it's a motif. It's a crochet motif. It might be a square motif, but it is not a granny square. So if nothing else, maybe we'll walk away with that knowledge. All right, guys, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed this. I love granny squares. I hope you guys do too. If you've never tried one, give these instructions, all of these instructions a try. I've got some tips, video tutorial, pattern instructions, stitch charts, and patterns. Give them a try. Let me know if you have any questions. Yeah, I can't wait to see your granny square makes. All right, guys, thanks so much for watching. Do me a favor, tag a crochet friend in the comments. Share this video in just one place that you enjoy crochet if you think they'll dig this too. I super love granny squares. I want them to be around forever in all of their forms and all of their variations. And I hope you do too. All right, everybody. Peace, love, crochet. Until next time. Bye-bye.